She cheated with my best friend. Yeah, the two people I trusted most turned my life into a lie. But I didn't scream, I didn't beg, and I didn't collapse. I planned. And when I struck back, I made sure their entire world watched them burn. If you've ever been betrayed, you know that hollow ache, the one that makes you question everything. Today, I'm sharing the story of how I turned that pain into power. Stick with me until the end, it's worth it. And hey, if you enjoy stories of justice and revenge, hit that like button and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. I never thought betrayal would come wrapped in the faces I loved most. My name's Emma. At the time this all started, I was 24, living in a small but cozy apartment downtown, juggling a demanding job in marketing with the excitement of a relationship that, I thought, was heading somewhere serious. Jake, my boyfriend of 3 years. The guy who knew my morning coffee order by heart, who had a way of slipping his hand into mine in crowded rooms as if to say, "She's mine, I've got her." And then there was Lily, my best friend since high school. We'd grown up together, shared heartbreaks, shared secrets. She was the one who held my hair back after too many drinks at college parties. The one who texted me, "You deserve better," after every dumb guy I dated before Jake. These two people weren't just part of my life, they were my safe place. My home, or so I thought. The night it all started unraveling is etched into my mind like a scar. It was a Friday. Jake had told me he was working late, and Lily had plans with a friend. I didn't think twice. But around 11 p.m., scrolling through Instagram, I saw it. A blurry photo someone else had posted from a local dive bar. In the corner of that photo, I saw them. Together, Jake's arm draped casually over Lily's chair, her leaning in too close, their heads bent together in a way that screamed more than friends. My chest tightened. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just a weird angle. But my gut, the same gut that had whispered warnings before every storm in my life, was screaming at me. "Emma, wake up. Something's wrong." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind looping questions like a broken record. Why would he lie? Why would she? Am I crazy? Am I overreacting? But when 2 a.m. rolled around, I heard the door click. Jake slipping into bed smelling faintly of beer and perfume that wasn't mine. He kissed my forehead and whispered, "Love you." The words felt poisonous. And yet, I didn't confront him. Not then, because betrayal doesn't always hit you like lightning. Sometimes it seeps in like poison, slow, subtle, until you're drowning. Over the next few weeks, the signs stacked up like bricks, building a prison around me. Jake's late nights, Lily's sudden flakiness, inside jokes between them that I wasn't part of. Once, I caught Lily smiling at her phone, and when I asked, "What's so funny?" she shrugged and said, "Just a meme Jake sent." Jake. They were talking. Without me, I felt sick. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the truth out of them. But instead, I smiled. I nodded. And deep inside, I started building a plan. Because here's the thing about me. When I feel powerless, I don't lash out. I observe. I wait. I sharpen my silence into a weapon, and they had no idea what storm was coming. You'd think once suspicion takes root, the truth would come quick and clean, like ripping off a Band-Aid. But no, betrayal isn't tidy. It festers. It plays tricks on you, makes you second-guess yourself, makes you wonder if you're the villain for even thinking such thoughts. For weeks, I lived in a limbo that gnawed at me every waking moment. I'd wake up next to Jake, watch him stretch, his hair messy, his smile lazy, and I'd wonder, how many times has that smile been hers too? I'd meet Lily for coffee, and she'd chatter about work drama or the latest Netflix series, and in between sips of her latte, I'd study her eyes, searching for cracks in her mask, but they were careful. Too careful. Jake started carrying his phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. He'd angle the screen away when texts popped up. Once I caught him smiling at something, typing fast, then locking his phone so quick you'd think it burned him. "Who's that?" I asked casually. "Work stuff," he said, his tone sharp, defensive. "Work stuff at midnight?" Right, Lily wasn't any better. She became slippery, canceling plans with vague excuses, flushing when Jake's name came up. Once she accidentally called me babe while we were laughing about something stupid. She froze, her face pale, then forced a laugh. "Oops, I hang out with you guys too much. I'm mixing you two up." My blood turned to ice. Still, I told myself maybe, just maybe, I was imagining it. Maybe my insecurities were poisoning me. After all, wasn't it easier to blame paranoia than to admit the two people I loved most were carving me out of my own life? But my body knew before my brain did I couldn't eat. My stomach was always twisted. Nights were the worst. I'd toss and turn, replaying every moment in my head. The way Lily once reached over me at dinner to grab something and her hand brushed Jake's arm. The way Jake laughed harder at her jokes than at mine. One night, I bolted upright at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, my heart racing like I'd run a marathon. I sat in the dark, shaking, whispering to myself, "You're not crazy. You're not crazy. Something's happening." But what could I do? I wasn't the type to go through phones or stalk people. Confronting them without proof felt like walking into a firing squad. So I suffered. And oh, how they reveled in it. The more I pulled back, the bolder they grew. Inside jokes, lingering touches. Once, during a group hangout, Jake passed Lily a drink and their fingers brushed. It lingered, too long, too intimate. I saw it. My chest tightened, my nails digging into my palms under the table. And then Jake looked at me. Really looked. His eyes searched mine for a reaction. When I forced a smile, he smirked. That smirk broke me because it wasn't guilt. It was arrogance he thought I didn't see. He thought I was too blind, too naive, too weak. That night, I cried until my throat was raw, my pillow was soaked. And in those tears, something inside me snapped, because pain has two faces, one of despair and one of rage. And once you've drowned enough in despair, rage is the only thing that keeps you afloat. I stopped asking, "Why me?" and started asking, "What now?" They had stolen my trust, my peace, my laughter, but I was going to take something from them too. I didn't know how yet. But I knew one thing. When I struck, it would be public. It would be humiliating. And it would leave scars they couldn't hide. So while they played their little game, I started mine. I began documenting. Every lie, every slip, every late-night work meeting Jake had, every time Lily forgot to mention she'd seen him. I became a ghost in my own life, nodding and smiling on the surface, while underneath I was sharpening my blade. And the funniest part? They thought they were winning. But the thing about betrayal is, sometimes the person you stab in the back survives. And when they do, they're far more dangerous than you ever imagined. There's a moment in every story like this where you stop floundering and start moving. For me, that moment came like a quiet click. Not dramatic, not loud, but definite. One afternoon, 3 weeks after I'd found that blurry photo, I was at my desk pretending to work while my stomach was in permanent revolt, when a notification popped up. A story highlight from Lily. A stupid, glittery video of her and Jake laughing, close, too close. The caption read, "Date night." Something in me that had been dulled by grief and disbelief hardened into clarity. I realized I didn't need to catch them in a public act. I needed to prove what they'd already done. And I needed to do it in a place where their audience was largest and their shame would be complete, public, painful, final. I closed my laptop and left the office, under the guise of running an errand. My hands were steady. My breaths were measured. I felt more awake than I had in months. First rule of revenge, I told myself, evidence. You can scream into the void all you want, but without evidence, you're just a hurt person pleading for attention. People will take the side that seems cleaner, more credible, less messy. So I started collecting, not in any invasive or illegal way. Nothing like hacking phones or breaking into apartments, but in the subtle, clever ways that real life affords. I saved screenshots. I kept receipts. I started a private folder on my laptop labeled simply, "For when." It was my talisman. Inside went every text that hinted at secrecy, every canceled plan, every suspicious photo. When Jake said "work thing" at midnight, I had the timestamps. When Lily laughed with a particular inflection, I wrote it down. I took photos of his jacket left on her couch when I happened to drop by for tea. I documented meticulously, like an investigator who also happened to be a woman furious at the world, but evidence alone wouldn't crush them. You need context. You need an audience that matters. So I began mapping their social world. Who are the mutual friends? Which of them were sympathetic to me, which would laugh and say relationships are complicated, and which would be eager to watch a train wreck? There was Sarah, who'd always been a soft spot for Jake's charm, but who was also, crucially, an organizer of after-work gatherings. Then there was Mark, Jake's old college buddy who loved gossip and carried it like a medal. I didn't rush. I could feel my old frantic self rising up, the one who wanted to text Jake accusations at 2 a.m., the one who wanted to storm into Lily's apartment and throw plates. But I had learned something in the weeks of sleeplessness. Instant release is shallow. Long satisfaction takes patience. I needed a plan with 3 pillars: proof, setting, and timing. Proof I was building quietly. Setting had to be public. Somewhere their faces would be up close, and many people would be watching. Not just friends, but colleagues, parents, people they respected. The amenity at Jake's company came to mind. An annual awards night, a fancy little gala that his office put on every year. It attracted everyone. Clients, bosses, sometimes even news bloggers. It was a perfect place for spectacle. Timing would be the hardest. I couldn't expose them in a hasty fit. The timing had to be such that they couldn't escape. Couldn't spin it into misunderstanding. I wanted their own mouths, the very thing they used to whisper, lies, to betray them. That's when the idea took shape. Not just a reveal, but a reveal stage to echo the betrayal. They had used secrecy and smirks, so I'd use truth and light. I'd make them stand before everyone they knew and show, with skeletal simplicity, what they'd done. Planning tasted like iron. I drew it on paper like a battlefield map. Scribbles and arrows and notes in the margins. Who to tell, what to show, where to stand, how to sound. Each line hardened my resolve. I started with allies. Revenge is more convincing when it's not just your word versus theirs. I reached out to Jess, a mutual friend who'd always been less enchanted by Jake's charm. I met her for coffee and let the anger leak out in measured doses. Not to manipulate her, but because I needed a witness. I showed her a few things. Nothing dramatic, just enough to tilt her judgment. Her eyes widened, then filled with the cold, efficient understanding of someone who had been betrayed before. "Do you want to see the rest?" I asked. She nodded. "When? Where?" "Soon," I said. "But not here." I can't be reckless. Jess agreed to be my confidant and, more importantly, to be the quiet hand that would help me make sure the right people were present. Next, I needed to ensure my evidence would be beyond reproach. Screenshots can be dismissed as fakes. Text can be deleted. Messages can be argued as taken out of context. So I arranged for more tangible, undeniable things. A photo of Jake's hat on Lily's balcony. A voice note Lily once sent to a friend that she thought was private, but that, in truth, was demonstrative and damning. How did I get that voice note? This is the ethical tightrope. I didn't hack phones. I didn't betray laws. I coaxed people trust. They forward. People being people, Mark forwarded me a clip he had of a voice memo where Lily drunkenly giggled and called Jake mine, and then laughed about sneaking around. Mark was sloppy and loved to boast. He thought the clip was a juicy piece of gossip, not a piece of evidence. I listened to it once, twice. The sound of her voice, bright and careless, calling Jake a pet name, made bile rise in my throat. But it was useful. It proved the intimacy I'd suspected. Between Jess, Mark, and a couple of others I subtly drew in, I began assembling a package. Screenshots, timestamps, a few photos, the voice memo. Each piece felt like a small, precise cut into the web they'd woven. Then I thought about the reveal itself. I didn't want to stand up and shout their sins like a prosecutor crying for justice. That would be melodramatic. And in the theater of social groups, melodrama is often dismissed as performance art. Instead, I wanted an altar of truth, something visual, simple, undeniable. I settled on a slideshow. It sounds almost archaic. PowerPoint in 2025, but that was the beauty of it. Slides are clinical. They strip drama and leave data. Pictures, dates, captions, one after the other. The room's lights dim. Faces illuminated by the glow. Everyone watches. It's proof, not performance. Now, how to get the slideshow shown? Jake's company gala had a short window for speeches and one slot for open mic, usually reserved for a CEO's jokes or a client's thank you. I needed that slot. I couldn't just waltz in and hijack it. So I created a reason to be on stage. An award. I'll admit, this was the part that made me feel a little like a con artist. I applied for a charity recognition award the gala offered, the kind given to community volunteers. I had legitimate credentials. I'd volunteered at the shelter sporadically. I'd donated time. It wasn't a lie. But getting the nomination took some nudging. Jess vouched for me. She wrote a glowing note about my commitment. Mark, with his knack for name-dropping, mentioned my involvement to the gala committee over drinks. Within 2 weeks, I had a brief on the agenda, Emma Lawson, recognized for community service. The committee asked for a short speech, 2 minutes. I asked for 5. They laughed, then agreed. They thought I'd be humble and brief. Perfect. With my slot secured, I started rehearsing the slideshow like someone rehearses a confession. Slide 1, a photo of Jake and Lily together at a public event, captioned with date and location. Slide 2, time-stamped messages. Slide 3, a cropped image from that initial blurry bar photo, enhanced just enough to show their closeness without leaving room for misinterpretation. Slide 4, transcribed snippets from the voice memo. Slide 5, simple, red text, they lied to you. They lied to me. Slide 6, a final picture, Jake and Lily's faces side by side, cut together with the words, "You deserve to know." I practiced standing at the podium. I practiced my voice, steady, not hysterical. I imagined everyone's faces, the sympathetic, the bewildered, the ones who'd side with the charmer simply because charm has currency. I prepared for their defenses. I imagined Jake's face blanching, Lily's smile crumbling, but a plan is only as good as its contingencies. I wrote down every possible riposte and how I'd answer. It's photoshopped, they might say. I had original photos and timestamps. "You're trying to ruin us," they might shout. I had receipts and accounts of the lies that were their own doing. If they accused me of being dramatic, I'd let the silent slides do the talking. Every night for 2 weeks, I ran through the sequence alone in my living room. I spoke into a mirror, shaping my cadence so it would sound less like grief and more like fact. The first few nights I cried afterward. Then the tears came less and less, replaced by a focused rage that felt like armor. And then the unexpected happened, an opportunity I hadn't planned for. Jake and Lily, stupidly unaware of what was coming, began spending more time together as if daring me. Their arrogance made mistakes. At a small pre-gala celebration at a friend's place, Lily, tipsy and wanting to feel invulnerable, started bragging to a few colleagues about how they'd managed to keep it hidden for months. She laughed about the thrill of secrecy. She used details that matched my gathered evidence. Her voice echoing in the corners of a room became another shard I could use. I sat at the edge of that party, smiling, looking at my drink, listening. People love to boast when they think no one important is listening. One of the attendees, an HR rep who had always been a stickler for fairness, overheard and later came to me privately whispering, "If you need to clear the air, use the gala. It's the perfect stage." He smiled, then looked uncomfortable, shifting his feet as if he could see the damage blooming. The universe loves coincidences when you plan well. So with the slideshow ready, my allies in place, and the gala slot locked, I began to think about timing down to the minute. I'd be introduced for the award, given 5 minutes. I would accept it calmly, then say I had a brief personal note to share because the room felt like family. I'd ask for the slideshow to be shown under the guise of raising awareness about the charity I supported. The gala organizers, who didn't know the truth, would happily oblige. Lights would dim and the screen would light up not just with my service photos, but with a narrative of deception. There were practicalities too. A backup USB, a cloud link, someone to manage the AV. Jess agreed to be at the tech table, pretending to adjust the slides. Mark was placed strategically among the crowd to make sure someone would push back if they tried to cut me off. I had rehearsed responses for how people might react. Silence, gasps, indignation. There were moral questions that tugged at me. I wasn't immune to them. Was I becoming petty? Was I seeking revenge because I liked the sensation of power? I sat with these thoughts on more than one sleepless night. I considered other paths, quiet exits, stern confrontations, slow withdrawal. But when I reviewed the months of small cruelties, the secret texts, the cold smiles, the way they reclaimed my jokes as their own, I felt justified. This wasn't about ruining them for the sake of ruin. It was about reclaiming my dignity in a world that prefers pretty lies to ugly truths. It was about making sure the people they hurt didn't have to guess whether they were being lied to. On the Monday before the gala, something almost derailed everything. Jake called me into the living room, casual as ever, and asked about the award. He had that smug curiosity, the kind men get when they think a woman's small achievements are nothing to be concerned about. "You're getting the Community Light Award? That's cute," he said, lounging on the couch, fingers steepled. "Yeah," I said, folding my hands around the mug of tea that I didn't really taste. "It's for the shelter," he cocked his head. "You seem different these days." I let that hang. Maybe I am, I said. Maybe I'm done being invisible. He laughed in that way that used to charm me. That's not how you go about it. No, it's not, I agreed. It's how I go about it. He brushed a curl behind his ear, oblivious. Well, good for you. Hope it goes well. When the phone clicked into silence and I heard the elevator, I felt both exhilaration and a cold, isolating fear. If any of them suspected, they might take countermeasures. They might publicly accuse me of attention-seeking. They might appeal to mutual friends. They might, and this was the part that tightened my chest, hurt me in ways I couldn't anticipate. But the more I thought about hiding, the more I realized hiding had been my default for months. Now I was choosing visibility, whether it scared me or not. I wanted my anger to be honest. I wanted my shame to be transmuted into something that belonged to me again. The night before the gala, I barely slept. I lay on the couch with the slideshow open on my laptop, the cursor blinking like a heartbeat. I whispered to the empty room, to the ceiling, to myself. This is for every time you convinced me I was overreacting. This is for every time you made me question my sanity. This is for every time you laughed with your lips but lied with your hands. Jess texted me at 1:24 a.m. You ready? I typed back. I was born ready. And then, with the audacity of the desperate, I printed out a few copies of the key slides and slid them into envelopes addressed to two people I trusted would not only read them, but act if anything went wrong. Sarah, who organized the gala, and the HR rep who'd overheard Lily's boasting. I included a simple note. If anything happens, use these. You'll know what to do. The envelopes felt heavy in my bag the next day as I dressed in something simple but not too demure. A knee-length black dress that said I was presentable but not begging for attention. I applied makeup that softened the edges of the tiredness under my eyes. I braided my hair because I wanted something practical. My hands trembled as I slipped my phone into my clutch. The curated instrument of my social life turned into a pistol primed with truth. We arrived early. The gala hall smelled of perfume and polish. Lighting was warm, the kind that makes plastic smiles look real. People milled around, plates of tiny hors d'oeuvres in hand, laughter ricocheting off the chandeliers. I greeted faces with practiced warmth, each congrats and you deserve it softer than it seemed. Jess thrummed beside me, nervy but collected. Mark wandered in with a conspiratorial look, as if the world were a stage and he'd been handed the cue cards. I could see Jake across the room, in a navy suit that fit him exactly right. Lily arrived with him, lipstick bright, hand on his arm like a flag claiming territory. They looked at me briefly with a smirk that said, "Good luck, babe. You'll never win." Then she moved on, tangled in conversation, like I was a cloud passing by. When Sarah took the mic to announce my name, a hush fell that felt deeper than I expected. It was real, palpable. I stepped up to the podium, and for a heartbeat, a childish, ridiculous part of me wanted to flee. I clung to the rehearsed lines like a lifeline. I accepted the small glass trophy with a smile, thanked the committee, the shelter, the volunteers. The applause sounded like a distant wave. I actually have a brief personal note I'd like to share, I said, and I felt dozens of eyes shift toward me, curious. This organization means the world to me, and I'd like to take a moment to be honest, not just about my volunteering, but about why honesty matters. I felt neither trembling nor bravado now, only a crystalline certainty. We talk a lot about community, I continued. We talk about trust. I think that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us the deepest. I heard a murmur. Jake's jaw tightened. Lily's smile faltered. And because I care about truth, I said, I'd like to share something. Not for revenge, but to make sure the truth is known. I signaled Jess, who at the tech table, with hands that looked calm, hit play. The screen flickered. The first slide, the photo of them at that bar, bloomed into the room. The lights dimmed. The hush deepened. For a second, the world narrowed to the glow of that screen and the sounds of my breathing. Then the slides began to roll, each one a small, logical blow. Dates, times, messages. The voice memo transcribed. People's faces dissolved from curiosity into a complex stew of surprise, sympathy, and something sharper. Jake's face, captured in a still frame from a text exchange where he'd written, "Can't wait to see you tonight," drained of color. Lily looked at him as if she'd suddenly tasted something bitter. Around us, whispers gathered like storm clouds. I felt a public exhale, the room letting its breath out at once. But then, as the slideshow reached the slide with the transcribed voice clip, something unexpected happened. A hand shot up from the audience. Jake's mother. She had been at the gala. Her face was a map of confusion and hurt. She stood, voice small but steady. Is this true? A dozen eyes pivoted to Jake and Lily. Jake's mouth opened, closed. Sweat beaded at his temple. Then Jake did something I hadn't fully anticipated. He stood up too. Emma, he said, voice tight, this is insane. You can't just... You had months to come clean, I said, the rehearsed cadence now fueled by a rawness I hadn't intended. You chose secrecy. His face shifted. He looked less like the man who'd whispered comfort and more like a cornered animal. Before he could say more, Lily pushed through a cluster of guests, cheeks flushed. This is harassment, she said, louder than she needed to be. This is humiliating. You're trying to ruin us. Mark laughed, a brittle sound. Pretty bold for a charity speech, he muttered, but his laughter sounded thin. The room hummed. People leaned in. My phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Are you sure about this? I didn't look. Every eye was on us now. The plan was working. The evidence had done its work. Yet beneath the triumph, a different pulse thudded. The knowledge that once a truth is spoken in public, it cannot be whispered away. And just when I thought the moment was fully mine, Jake reached out, voice desperate now, and said 3 words I still hear when I close my eyes. You're crazy. Emma, it was the dismissal I'd feared and expected. He tried to paint me as unstable. He glanced at his colleagues, searching for allies. That's when I heard the soft click at the back of the room. The sound of a phone camera, hundreds of eyes swiveling that direction. Someone had started recording. Someone else was already live streaming. The avalanche had begun. I will admit now, with the unflinching honesty I'd asked for earlier, that my heart hammered not in elation alone, but in a cocktail of fear and vindication. The plan had unfolded to this point. The rest was the execution. The part where consequences would either land or miss. As I stepped down from the podium, the chatter rose, a thundercloud I could no longer control. Jake grabbed my arm, fingers hard, eyes imploring. Please, he said low. Don't do this. And in that moment, something in me surged, a pool of hurt I'd let crystallize into weaponized truth. I already did, I said. The room buzzed. Phones flashed. Someone called security. Jake's colleagues whispered judgments. Lily's face was gray now, raw. But the worst, I realized, wasn't what they were saying. It was the echo of all the small betrayals recycling through the room like a slideshow on loop. The whispers were no longer about charity or community. They were about loyalty and deception and the faces people wear to keep others safe. I had pulled a thread and a whole sweater was unraveling. Part 4. The execution and fallout. When the room erupted, it was a sound like a storm in a teacup. Sharp, sudden, full of tiny splinters of shock and gossip. Phones flashed like a constellation gone wrong. Voices overlapped, some curious, some outraged, some pitying. I could feel the heat of a dozen judgments on my skin like a wind that wanted to sweep me away. Jake's grip on my arm was hot and frantic. For a second I thought I'd relent, that a lifetime of shared mornings, of small kindnesses, would bloom back to life under his panic. But whatever tenderness I had for him had been collapsed into the flat plane of betrayal. Those mornings still existed, but they were stained now. They were glimpses of someone who had never truly chosen me when a choice was available. You can't do this here, Jake said, the words a plea that smelled of alcohol and entitlement. You started it, I said, cool despite the tremor in my hands. You lied, Lily's voice came high and thin. He's lying. You're theatrics, Emma. This is private. Isn't that always the defense? Turn the public into private. Make the one calling attention to wrongdoing the villain for having the gall to speak. But the public was already awake. People were murmuring. Jake's colleagues clustered, whispering phrases like unprofessional and this will be awkward for quarterly reviews. And just under those practical concerns, something nastier. The delicious entertainment of watching the pedestal topple. And then the unexpected pivoted the whole moment. Jake's boss, a man named Martin who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward and cleared his throat. His voice was low, careful. Jake, can we talk for a second outside? I watched as loyalty, the currency of corporate life, began to unravel. Martin's face was a ledger opening. He didn't slam Jake. He didn't defend. He simply wanted facts, clarity. If a scandal touched his company, he wanted to protect it. In the corridor, Jake argued, trying to spin. It was nothing. It was a mistake. She's making it up. He leaned toward Martin and said, "You know me. You know I'm professional." Martin's expression said something I did not expect. Disappointment. If this is true, it's a problem. He didn't say if like a bluff. It was the kind of if that acknowledged truth. Jake's face went the color of a bruise. Back in the hall, Lily's defenses grew louder, shriller. "You're cruel," she told me. "You humiliated me in front of my family." Her mother, who had been quietly talking to an acquaintance, looked mortified. I felt a stab of something like remorse. Not for what I had done, but for the gravity of hurting someone's mother, or seeing the pain in that woman's eyes. But pain for them was different. It was the precise mirror of everything they'd done to me and to others. The live streams multiplied. Jess muttered into my ear, "They're all over Instagram. Mark's posting clips." I felt oddly detached, like a diver watching themselves through ripples of water. That night, the internet became a courtroom. Clips of the slideshow looped. Screenshots were cropped and recirculated. The narrative splintered, as it always does online. Some called me vindictive. Some called Jake a cheater. Others debated the ethics of public shaming. People chose their poles quickly, the way magnets snap into place. In the days that followed, the fallout spread outward like ripples from a splashed stone. Jake's company called a meeting. He was put on paid administrative leave pending an internal inquiry. There were HR emails and referral links and polite, sterile language about code of conduct and conflict of interest. He sent me messages at odd hours, apologies that sounded like scripts, explanations that were thin. I forwarded them to my private folder. Lily unfriended me on everything in an act that felt both childish and necessary. She wrote a long Facebook post about privacy and cruelty, painting herself as the victim of a personal vendetta. Half of her followers bought it. She sent a message to one of my coworkers, a panicked apology turned aggressive, and I made screenshots. People want to be the protagonist. They will rewrite where necessary to keep the crown. Friends called. Some were gentle, checking on my emotional state. Some were furious with me, not with Jake and Lily, but with the spectacle. Was public humiliation necessary? A voice asked over coffee. Couldn't you have handled it privately? I listened. I told them the truth. I had tried quiet. Quiet had failed. Quiet had let them continue. The more the conversations spiraled, the more clear a line became. This wasn't about cruelty for its own sake. This was about correcting an injustice that had been invisible. If I had done this to humiliate rather than to reveal, I would not have arranged for evidence or invited independent friends or allowed the room to ask questions. I would have been a screaming woman and perhaps dismissed as unstable. The fact that people argued about public humiliation only proved the point. Our culture prizes reputation over truth until someone forces the two into the same room, but blowback came like weather. Some friends shifted away. Mutual acquaintances made the choice to stand at a comfortable distance. Mark, who had at first been delightfully complicit, suddenly felt exposed and distant. "It's messy," he told me, as if his moral discomfort absolved him of any participation. And then there were those small, insidious punishments, the invitations that dried up, the sudden polite silences at gatherings where I used to be the loud center. People who once found my jokes charming now treated me with a fragile politeness as if I were glass. I grieved those vanishings in private, because grieving was the honest thing. Revenge is a wound that leaves tenderness, and when it's done, you sweep the room and realize things are missing. The house was quieter. But it was my quiet now. In the smoke and clatter after the gala, I sat alone in my apartment to process. The trophy was still on the shelf. It seemed like a relic from a different life. Someone else might have kept it. I touched it and felt the cold weight of the metal. I thought about the month of evidence gathering, the nights of rehearsal, the moral scale that had tipped in my chest. I had wanted truth. I had wanted accountability. I had caused pain. I had also reclaimed a part of myself that had been minimized. 2 weeks later, a call came from the shelter director. They'd received an uptick of donations, people inspired by the volunteer work, and they wanted to feature me on their site for an interview. I felt an odd, quiet pride. The charity I'd highlighted had gained something. Truth can be messy and still do good. As for Jake and Lily, their worlds shifted in ways they hadn't expected. Jake's colleagues were divided. Some empathized with his embarrassment. Some quietly replaced him on projects. A leak, A text message I'd kept in my folder was used in the HR inquiry. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was documentation that led to an internal review. His paid leave stretched. The career he'd assumed was steady trembled. Lily found doors closing in other ways. People who'd once invited her to intimate gatherings stopped returning her calls. The social currency she'd spent on secrecy had been revoked. She texted apologies that read like scripts written for someone else. And slowly, the shine disappeared. But what haunted me most in the quiet after the storm wasn't their humiliation. It was the echo of a more complicated truth. People will hurt, and the aftermath of that hurt doesn't align neatly with justice. There were moments of triumph. A supportive message from a stranger who said, "Thank you for showing courage," and ugly moments, like an acquaintance sneering that I had ruined lives. The world likes neat morality plays, but life is messy. My actions had consequences I'd predicted and others I hadn't. A month after the gala, a small group of mutual friends met in a diner, ostensibly to clear the air. I went because closure is a muscle I like to exercise. People came with varying degrees of contrition. Jake's mother sat across from me, eyes rimmed red. "I didn't know," she said simply. The rawness of that admission softened me in ways I hadn't anticipated. Compassion rushed in like rain after a long drought. I told her what I'd seen, the evidence I'd had, not because I needed to prove it to her, but because the truth deserved to be spoken. Jake tried a face-to-face apology. It sounded like a script. "I'm sorry," repeated, unmoored from the weight of what that sorry meant. "I was stupid," he said. "I didn't think about how it would hurt you." The word stupid felt shallow next to the scope of the betrayal, but there was also a gesture, a small, honest admission that he'd acted selfishly. Perhaps that was something. Forgiveness isn't a binary switch, it's a slope. I told him I was still angry, and that forgiveness wasn't owed on a timetable. He nodded like a man wounded in ways that would not heal overnight. Lily, when we finally spoke, was cold and sharp. "You made me out to be a monster," she said. "You made my family look at me like I'm trash." "You cheated on me with my best friend," I said. The words landed with a simple gravity. "You were a monster because you betrayed me, not because I exposed it. You made your choices." She had an answer ready. "We're both human. People make mistakes. I could understand that. People do make mistakes. But choice matters. And choosing to hide, to pretend, to continue after having the chance to stop is not an accident. It's a deliberate movement. The dust settled not into uniform silence, but into a series of truths that required constant work. People took sides, recovered reputations, or lost them. I was thanked by some and vilified by others. The scale of consequences varied. But one thing remained. My life could not be resumed like it had been. It had been altered. That was both loss and liberation. There were nights later where I lay awake, not from plotting, but from the same hollow grief that had pushed me to plan. I wondered if I'd chosen rightly. Had I chipped away at the social fabric with a hammer when a scalpel might have been more merciful? I didn't know. I only knew that the months before had been intolerable and that silence had been the accomplice of the betrayal. Months later, Jake called to tell me he'd resigned. The company had offered him a settlement in exchange for leaving quietly. He sounded hollow. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I didn't know how to be better." He moved away into a smaller apartment across town. Lily unfollowed my mutual friends and retreated into a quieter life. The social machinery that had been so alive around them wound down. For me, the changes were quieter. At work, there was an awkwardness at first. Some colleagues distanced themselves, unsure how to navigate the new reality. But others, people I hadn't expected, came closer. They told me they'd admired my courage. They told me the slideshow was necessary. I felt grateful for those voices, tender toward them. I found a new rhythm. I took long walks again. I started volunteering more deliberately at the shelter. Not to prove anything, but because service steadied me. I wrote in a journal, messy, unpolished entries that tracked the months. I let my anger be a teacher, not a permanent resident. And then, one evening as the year changed and the city in my window lit its distant fires, I met someone new, not as a throne to replace the one taken, but as a person who listened. We spoke about small things at first, favorite books, the taste of lemon in tea. He asked about my shelter work, genuinely interested. He did not press for specifics about my past. When I told him, it was in measured doses. He did not gasp or rally against me. He listened. Trust grew slowly, as a plant does when watered with cautious hands. It would be dishonest to say that my heart was fully healed. Scars don't function like that. They are maps. But I had learned a kind of civic courage, the right to reclaim truth, and the responsibility of living with the aftermath. One cold afternoon, months after the gala, I received an email from one of Jake's ex-colleagues. It read, "Thank you. You made me think about the ways I enable behavior I don't fully understand. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Little admissions like that, private and honest, felt like sunlight through a crack, and the world kept turning. If you ask me if I regret it, I'll tell you this honestly. There are shades. I regret the ways the ripple hurt people who hadn't directly betrayed me. I regret the evenings I lay awake and felt colder for the choices I made. But I do not regret reclaiming a piece of my dignity. Silence had become the language of their advantage. Speaking loudly in public with evidence was my way of saying I deserve a life not built on other people's duplicity. Revenge isn't a clean moral victory. It's messy, it's human, and it carries both consequence and relief. The taste of vindication is not sweet so much as clarifying. It showed me where I had been underestimated and where I had power I had forgotten I owned. It taught me that truth, when wielded responsibly, can reshape relationships and force accountability. People will tell you the high road is always better. Sometimes it is. Sometimes the high road is a path of dignity and private strength. Other times, the high road is a road paved over your dignity by people who never called out their own transgressions. You are allowed to choose how you respond. You are allowed to seek truth, and you are allowed to live with the consequences. If this story teaches anything beyond the drama, let it be this. Protect your peace, but not at the cost of your truth. And when something feels wrong, listen to that ache. Let it guide you to actions that are deliberate, not purely reactionary. Be precise, be thoughtful, and own the aftermath, whatever it may be. If you stuck with me to the end, thank you. Truly. If you've ever been betrayed or forced to choose between silence and truth, tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Hit like if you felt the sting of this story, subscribe for more long-form true feel revenge narratives, and share this with someone who needs to know they're not alone. Justice looks different for everyone. I'd love to hear how you'd handle it.